I do want to ask whether you think the party more broadly from their side, the politicians, if you think that we're in a moment right now where they finally understand the importance of independent media and are going to kind of move away from conferring all of their attention, all of their goodwill onto legacy media. Like the difference between the two sides is that when Republicans want to deliver news, when they want to give somebody a juicy interview, they don't go to ABC or CBS or CNN or NBC. They go to Breitbart. They go to Washington Examiner. They go to Daily Wire, to Tucker Carlson. Democrats don't do that. Democrats, we kind of feel like it's not legit unless it's under behind the glossy veneer of legacy media. Do you think that is finally sinking in, that not only are there diminishing marginal returns in terms of the people that they can reach on legacy media, but that if you actually want to find people who are persuadable, they're not the people who are tuning into MSNBC every day?
In this clip from Brian Tyler Cohen's channel, we have him and Kyle Kuliski from the Secular Talk going absolutely mental on Joe Rogan for MAGA heel turning. I think if you know Joe Rogan and if you actively watch his podcast or at least have seen clips, you should be able to very clearly guess which side he's on. And this clip explores the conversation of whether or not that is justified and if Joe Rogan is doing too much. Without spoiling anything, let's get into it. I'll be giving you my unfiltered take as always.
I mean, that's a great question. I don't know. I think more Democrats are going to be open to independent media, but I also think there's a little bit of a structural issue there too, because the right and their media ecosystem, like, let's just call it what it is, they're absolute sycophants, right? Like, their whole purpose is like, we love MAGA, we love Trump, we love Republicans, we exist to puff up your ego, pump out your message, and like that's the end of it. And I think the difference on our side is that there's just a lot more honesty. So like if I'm interviewing somebody like Bernie Sanders, it's mostly going to be a softball interview because I like 97% agree with him. I might ask him like one or two hard questions. But, you know, if I'm interviewing your Joe Schmo average congressional Democrat, I mean, there might be 3 or 4 votes that they cast that I like really have a moral issue with. And then it's like, so what do? Do I focus on just the area where I disagree and give the audience the impression that this person is really bad and evil? Or do I only focus on the parts where I agree, which sort of feels almost like unfair in the other direction, where like I'm giving them too much credit? Or do I focus on both things? And so there really is just a structural problem. The other structural problem is the right really has an endless amount of big money.
Let's think about this because it's a huge factor. Right-wing billionaires pour money into think tanks, media companies, and influencers to push their agenda. These aren't just investments, they're strategic moves to shape public opinion. On the left, we don't see the same level of coordinate funding. Sure, there's support from Hollywood and Silicon Valley, but it's fragmented. The right has mastered the art of long-term cultural investment, while the left seems to be stuck in a cycle of reacting to the latest crisis. If the Democrats want to compete, they need to build a sustainable infrastructure that supports independent media and amplifies diverse voices that reaches people where they are. The Republicans have mastered it, and obviously we see the results of that.
I mean, right-wing think tanks are flush with billionaire money. Same thing with, the Daily Wire and all the, right-wing shows online. And on our side, it really is a lot more just like sink or swim and try to come up with some sort of a business model where the audience can sustain you. And so I don't really have a great answer to your question. Other than that, I think there are some Democrats who understand the power of new media and independent media. People like Ro Khanna. And to his credit, he's always engaged, even when I might have an interview with him where I'm like, let's focus on these 3 areas where I disagree with you. Right. So, but I don't know. I don't know if we can, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. How can we copy like a Joe Rogan style interview, right? Like it seems like that's a thing for them over there, especially because now he's sort of embarrassing himself by hanging out with robber barons on a daily basis and being a propagandist for MAGA. What he's doing has become really gross and off-putting, and I think people will learn that in time.
I think it's incumbent on us to kind of recapture some of culture. Politics is downstream of culture, and we've kind of ceded that ground to the right. And even when you look at when Kamala Harris went on Call Her Daddy, that was largely a political, well, it was entirely political when she went on there. But when Republicans go on these shows, it's not necessarily just to talk about politics. It's not necessarily just to talk about policy. They're able to meet these people where they are, and Democrats don't do that. It's just politics. And so,
yeah, I mean, this is a perfect example of how Democrats often miss the mark. Sending Kamala Harris to call her daddy was an attempt to appeal to younger voters, but it felt forced. Compare that to how Republicans approach media. They integrate seamlessly into shows, podcasts that don't scream politics. They make themselves relatable, even when they're peddling bad ideas. Democrats need to stop treating these appearances like one-off PR stunts. Instead, they should focus on creating long-term relationships with platforms that resonate with everyday people. If you want to win over new voters, you have to speak their language, and not just during election season.
We don't have, these red-pilled comedians that are doing this,
Right.
shows in the same way that, and you can take issue with their specific politics, but like the Theo Vons of the world, the Shane Gillises, and again, you don't know specifically whether they're overt Republicans, but it's red coded, right?
Right.
And so I think that it's incumbent on the left to figure out how, when we talk about politics, or when we have our ecosystem more broadly, our left of center ecosystem, that it can't just be politics, because for a lot of these people who are watching this stuff, their worldview is informed by the people that they're spending 3-4 hours a day listening to, and it's not based on politics. And only then, when it comes time to have an election around September, October, when that stuff is really in the zeitgeist, will they start to talk about it. But by that, and of course, their opinions are informed by right-wing ideology. But by that point, people who have listened to them have been listening to them for 3 or 4 hours a day, and they trust them. And so when Democrats have come in September or October of an election year and dump $1 billion, $2 billion into these ads on TV that go in one ear and out the other, that's not going to be able to contend with what the right has, which is, again, all of these right-wing, right-influenced influencers, and they've got an audience who trusts them, who derives their entire worldview from listening to these people on a daily basis. And so when those people give their political opinions, people are going to listen, and they're going to be so much more influential than just saying oh, look, I saw an ad on CBS during a football game, and so that's how I'm going to create my political worldview right now. It doesn't work like that anymore. It's not that people they're going to take their cues from Joe Rogan if they've listened to Joe Rogan for the last 12 months for 4 hours a day. When he finally starts to talk about politics in September or October, they're not going to do it because they saw some ad by the Democratic Party in October.
And that's why you actually hit the nail on the head as to why Rogan has really gotten under my skin, and I've really been going after him, is because he did a bait and switch. He was, for a very long time, left-coded, and he would talk about left-wing issues. And then over time, he ended up flipping and endorsing Trump.
Rogan positioned himself as the everyman, someone who questioned authority and called out BS on both sides. But over time, he cozied up to the MAGA crowd, and it feels like a complete 180. When someone with Joe Rogan's platform starts normalizing far-right talking points, it shifts the overturn window in a big way. Brian's not even overreacting here, because this kind of cultural bait and switch has major effects, which need to be recognized.
And he knows that Trump massively cut taxes for the wealthy and corporations. He knows that we lost 200,000 manufacturing jobs under Trump. He knows that Trump presided over a net loss of 2.9 million jobs. He knows that 2.3 million people lost health insurance under him. He knows he appointed more Wall Street CEOs and billionaires than any president in history. He knows he filled the NLRB with union busters. He knows that his labor department stiffed 8 million workers of overtime pay. And I think that's what frustrates me, is exactly what you described, which is he was a cultural podcaster first, and just like your everyman first. But then effectively, he basically sane washed the right and made it seem like, oh, they're the down to earth ones. They're the ones who are more realistic and more like you and understand you. And I think people are in for a really, really rude awakening about that when they realize your wages aren't going up. You're not getting better health care. More jobs are going to be outsourced, and it's going to be more tax cuts for the rich, and it's going to be a disaster.
Well, what would you attribute that to? Because would you say it's because these guys are just wealthy and Republicans are just better for wealthy people? And of course, they have to use culture wars as a distraction so that people don't pay attention to their economic agenda. Or B, do you think that he was a perpetrator or a victim of this whole distraction campaign where Republicans made the entire election basically a referendum on a talking point that didn't exist in practice? This idea that Kamala Harris's agenda was gender reassignment surgeries among trans inmates in prison, something that came about in 2019 and that she's disavowed since then. And so do you think that for him, this is something, again, like, do you think that he is somebody who knew about this and was like, okay, I want a better economic agenda, so I'm going to keep pushing this along with the other people at the top of the Republican Party who know better, but like, fuck it, we'll just keep pushing it anyway? Or do you think that he was actually like a victim of this disinformation campaign himself, and he's like, oh, I keep hearing about trans inmates in prison, and so this must be the thing that everybody's talking about in politics. This must be what this election is a referendum on?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think his friend group, he's surrounded by like edgy right-wing comedians who think just offending people is comedy, basically. And you mix that with their like weird obsession with free speech, where they built this idea in their mind that like, oh, it's only censorious college lefties who crack down on free speech. Not like Trump or anything is super censorious and authoritarian. Never that, of course. Right. But like, you immerse yourself in that world. You're surrounded by right-wing voices all the time. And then, he's mega wealthy, and he's surrounded by UFC fighters who are pro-Trump, surrounded by wealthy business people who are pro-Trump, celebrities who are pro-Trump. He sort of cocooned himself in this right-wing echo chamber. And then I think eventually over time it became he's more the perpetrator than the victim. But he started out as a victim. And then now it's very clear he's just thrown his lot in with MAGA. And the same way he has his like conservative comedian friend group and they all look out for each other. Now I think that tent has broadened to like now I also look out for J.D. Vance and Donald Trump and Republican politicians. But
here's the problem. When you surround yourself with a single ideology, it starts to feel like the only reality. Rogan has cocooned himself in a right-wing echo chamber filled with comedians, UFC fighters, and wealthy influencers who all reinforce the same ideas. At some point, he stopped being a critical thinker and became a mouthpiece for the people around him. At that point, it's no longer independence, it's capitulation. To be honest, put anyone in a scenario like that, it's almost impossible not to adopt those same ideologies. It's just how the human mind works. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. I personally think one thing that is very clear is that anyone who wants to win the election or win over voters needs to start adopting independent media and take advantage of it to connect to the actual voters that will matter, especially moving forward. Again, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Be sure to give us a like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.